Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in into the next live Q&As of Remote Future Summit 2019. We are just starting, so grab a coffee or a tea and make sure to leave us some questions. You can either leave them in Teachable or directly into a Slido. That's your choice, really. We already got some, so if you like some of them and if you really want us to ask some of them, then make sure to upvote by clicking thumb up. My name is Magda and I'm head of communications for Remote How, and I will be just asking a questions today. The main guest is Andreas Klinger, and he will do a short intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Andreas.
Hey, Magda. Thanks for having me. So my name is Andreas. Born and raised in Vienna. I lived in Berlin, London. Nowadays, I'm living in San Francisco. I have a very long and very confusing and very strange CV, but the interesting short part of it is I used to be founding team of a company called ProductHunt, which is basically imagine the App Store and Reddit have an ugly baby. I used to be the CTO, the engineering manager there. We were acquired by a company called AngelList, which is basically LinkedIn for startups, about 2 years ago. And nowadays, I'm within AngelList. I'm leading what we call remote strategy. So making sure that talented people worldwide actually have a chance of working on international careers. So you might live in, let's say, Poland, and you actually want to have a really strong career and like work for international company in the UK or in San Francisco. So this is like my bigger mission here to make this work.
So with that being said, I think you are a perfect person to speak to today about remote work, engineering management, team management. Frankly, we have many different questions, but let's kick off with this one. What's your opinion on having a salary depending on cost of living of an employee?
I love that you instantly start with the hardest question. It's like, isn't this like a super divisive question? Like people, it's like really heated discussions usually, right? So I mean, there's two sides to this, right? Like one side is it's the same work, therefore it should be the same money for everybody. Doesn't matter where people live, right? That's the like one side to it. The other side to it is like if I pay somebody 80K and this person lives in San Francisco, they can barely. Yeah, I mean, kindergarten is like $2,000 here. Like that's kindergarten. That's not even rent. That's kindergarten. So how would this work for somebody who's in San Francisco? But it would be an amazing salary for somebody who is in Sofia, Bulgaria, right? They have, let's say, 12% over there and living costs. So how do you make this work? And in my experience, it doesn't really, like you can't use the same salary, because what you do essentially say by that is like, if the salary is too low, move somewhere else where it's cheaper for you to live. And as soon as you do that, you're basically saying we don't hire people wherever they are. We don't try to hire best people. We try to hire people who happen to live in cheap locations. The alternative to that would be pay everybody San Francisco salaries. I mean, if you can do that, that's great. That's something you can consider. But like, keep in mind that if you pay somebody 140 in San Francisco, that's a okay-ish salary for a, let's say, mid-level engineer here. That same salary is like enough to pay a down payment for a flat in a lot of countries. So you don't provide the same quality of living, and usually a lot of like it creates a weird balance within the team. I had situations where I was discussing for junior roles with people in Latin America. They were like by far too senior for the role, but like the salary that was provided, like the lower boundary was more than they were like currently getting. So it's like a really complex topic. My personal POV in it is like always try to pay international salary, like that's above market locally. Always try, like especially with senior talent, as soon as they are used to working for international companies, they average their expectations to like not their city or their country, but like to the region. So somebody in Europe all of a sudden has like an international European salary expectation, although they're based in Eastern Europe. And that's normal. And like, that's something you should definitely pay. You shouldn't try to pay for the low local outsourcing cost, because that's something different and it's a different kind of people. So TLDR on that is pay market, optimize for cost of like quality of life costs, I would say, like that people have roughly the same costs, but I expect that people will normalize to a certain international salary, especially when they get more senior.
I have a kind of follow-up question on this that is out of script. That is out of script. So
by the way, everything here is completely scripted. Like,
yeah, as long as you don't, hit us with many questions that we haven't planned or seen earlier. But yeah, I got this one. You made me think while basically we're talking about this. What do you think about the salary transparency in companies that have distributed workforce? And it's kind of intuitive that people might get different salaries based on their location. So what about like full transparency?
I mean, yeah, it's very often like put together, right? Because Buffer does both. I think it's fair to publish your salary brackets. Like basically the how you calculate salaries, how you, for example, like there's a base, then there's like a location, like a location add-on, then there's like a multiplier for seniority or specialization and all this kind of stuff, right? I think it's completely fair to publish that. A lot of companies also like even people like in, I don't know, San Francisco companies publish their brackets. They say like junior is 100 to 140, right? And I think that's completely fair. To have the complete transparency of salary, I think that's something the team has to decide. Like if this feels right for the team, do that. And I think that's a huge benefit to like a lot of companies, because a lot of people applying for jobs, when they see like it's a remote team, are a little bit worried that they will taken advantage of, right? So if you are fully transparent on that, a lot of people will realize that you actually pay above market. So has pro and con, but that's a decision very unique to a team. Personally, I'm not sure if I would do that, because it just like leads to so many discussions publicly, not within the team usually, but publicly. And it's just an additional overhead you have to expect. On the other hand, why not? Like if it works for you, it works for you. And by the way, regarding the scripted thing, throw in as many questions as you have, guys, like folks, like throw them in, and we like afterwards, we will just pick them from recents.
Yeah, and then maybe, who knows, maybe you'll tweet about some of these things. You'll get it as your inspiration for like articles and stuff. So no questions will be wasted. Now, we started, from a big picture, salaries. Let's get a little bit tactical. Many speakers got this question, so we have to ask you this as well. What is your tool stack recommendation for the remote workers?
Yeah, you warned me about that one. I don't have a good answer. Like, I believe it's pretty much the same as similar companies that are not remote, but a little bit larger. So, for example, if you are, I don't know, 10 people remote, you should roughly act like you're 50 people co-located. So at 50 people co-located, you would invest in a good conference tool. Like you would get a Zoom account, for example, instead of constantly trying to use Hangouts. Or you would invest, like you would have Slack, or you would have maybe some alternative to Slack could be threads.com or Twist, something like that, like an asynchronous version. A part of that, I don't think there's much magic. I'm personally a huge fan of Notion and Airtable, and we use that in AngelList. But I think there's not a big advantage you have. So I don't have a good answer to that, to be honest.
I guess what you've said earlier will apply, that whatever works for you works. So there is no one framework or tool stack that there is ready and you can pick it up. Now, let's say you're a company, you have already the tool stack that matches your needs, and you need some people on board. So a question. Is there something that you should be doing differently while interviewing remote workers versus the one to be in office with you? How would you answer this?
So what I would do, independent if it's like co-located or not, but it's something that is especially important when you're remote. So what's very common, especially here in San Francisco, is to do multiple technical interviews, where from like the legendary whiteboard testing down to hypothetical questions about architecture and down to, I don't know, coding challenges, all this kind of stuff is usually done. I'm personally not a big fan of those, especially in remote teams. What I noticed for myself is if somebody is a native speaker, American native speaker, and he, I don't know, worked for any San Francisco company, he will know how to talk like tech cool. Like he will know how to talk like a good engineer, like a strong engineer, right? Even though if they might not be one, right? So what I regularly notice for myself is that I'm not a native speaker, and I sometimes, I don't know, struggle coming across as confident, as knowledgeable in a non-native language. And that's more maybe like a bias I put on myself than maybe the truth, but it makes me very conscious about this, right? So what I also noticed when I talk to other non-native speakers is they sometimes struggle a bit in coming across as crisp in English, right? And what I learned for myself, what works by far better than doing interviews is after do the interviews for culture and like just to check if people are in values and everything. But afterwards to pair programming. So get something that's really close to your actual product. Like it's like a product hunt we did, for example, a mini product hunt. Build something like that and let them fix one or two features in it, extend it, discuss something. We used to have refactoring challenges. We have like additional features, bug fixing, all this kind of stuff. Something that reflects the real world, right? Do that together, like spend an hour on that. Like the other person shares the screen, you work together through it, like the person talks while they talk. And I will learn more about the person as a developer than you will learn through all the technical interviews. I'm a strong believer in that. Like I strongly believe in that. And also what I noticed is that a lot of people who struggle with English as a native language excel in that kind of stuff. And I had a lot of San Francisco senior engineers where I was like, where did you program before? Like, did you program before? Like, what's happening, right? So yeah, like my biggest recommendation for especially remote teams is focus on pair programming. If you can give them a project for like a week that you pay, like that could be like your first longer term project, right? I know companies that get people in for 1 week and basically say you are like hired now for 1 week. That's your trial period. That makes sense. Or do like a project that also makes sense, you know. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, at least do pair programming sessions with them and focus on that.
I think that's one very actionable advice that all our viewers can apply into hiring developers or any tech workers actually. Now, after you get someone in, how do you onboard remote workers? That's the next one.
So at ProductHunt, I went a little bit overboard with this, and my successor actually went even more overboard with this. So maybe I did not go that far as I thought. So what I did is with any new hire, I told them every day we will do like a short call, like half an hour maybe, right? And the goal of this call is not so much that you have to report me or that you have to present me what I asked from you for the next day or something like that. The goal is that you know if you run into any trouble today, latest tomorrow morning, somebody can like me or like somebody from my team will like dedicate time to help you with that, right? So it takes a little bit the stress of situations because when you join a new team and like everything is overwhelming. You have, of course, you have good documentation, you have good onboarding documents, you have good manuals and all this kind of stuff. But as soon as like the person actually hits the floor and has to work on real stuff, it's like this stuff, what the hell is going on here, right? And knowing that you have a person dedicated every day to talk with you is like a huge relief. The other thing is, especially in remote teams in the beginning, it's like you need to get people to connect to the team and like basically see other people as humans and not like as Slack avatars. And although they can't interact with the whole team, it's very important at least interact tightly with their direct report, for example, which would be the hiring manager. So yeah, I think that's a super important one. My successor actually went overboard with this. He, instead of doing 2 weeks, and I actually usually said like it's 2 weeks, but like after 1 week, I'm kind of like, if you don't need it, we don't need it. Like, let me know. And he's actually, no, 2 weeks is mandatory. And worst case, we talk about the weather. Like it's, if it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes, doesn't matter. And another 2 weeks optional. Like you don't have to do them, but like I will block them in my calendar, right? So it's like a full month in his case. I strongly believe in that. That plus the obvious ones, which are like good manuals, good onboarding documents, make recrutations so that they get to know people outside of their own team. If like, you know, like every Friday they have like a 15 minutes call with somebody, like 2 or 3 15 minutes call with somebody, all this kind of stuff, which is kind of like the obvious advice. I strongly believe in daily one-on-ones.
Okay, now we have an employee that's with us, he's onboarded. Let's get maybe a little bit more tactical on managing, on engineering management specifically. We have a couple of questions on that. So let's start with quite general advices. So what is some engineering management advice you would tell early startup companies?
Oh, yeah, cool. So I have 2 things I strongly believe in, and they're a little bit abstract. Like the first one is optimizing for single player experience, which basically means in a nutshell, the person will work alone, and every time they have to ask somebody else, they will lose a lot of time. And especially if you're new to a team, you don't want to look like an idiot who doesn't even know how to run the local system, right? So the more you remove all these friction points, the better. The more you automate, like the more tooling tells the person, hey, you're doing something wrong, versus like, you know, like you finished in engineering management, you worked on a feature for a week, like a few days, and then you publish it to the other people, and everybody's like, error number 1, error number 2, like this you did you wrong, this did you wrong, and like everybody like tells you like little things you did wrong, and you're like, this is very frustrating, right? So if you can automate that through like best practice linting, code style linting, security static analysis, tests, and all this kind of stuff, the more you can automate or put in process, better for this person, because they don't have to rely on other people. They can work with their own speed. They basically can play single player, and they only have to add other players if they actually want, but not because they need, right? I strongly believe in that one. The second one I strongly believe in is what I call systemizing trust. So very often we think of trust as something that's binary, in the sense of like, I either trust you or I don't, right? But as a manager, this is a little bit a limiting mental model. So it's not binary. Like you trust me different. Like you might, I don't know, you might trust me to have a conference call with you, but that doesn't mean that you would trust me with, I don't know, your car, your newborn, right? Like it's very different. Like, but on the other hand, there's people you know that you would trust blindly, whatever. And so like it's very different for every person, but it's also very different over time. Like after some time, you might trust me enough with like more things, right? So a lot of people think in this way, that they say it's about a segmenting authority. So basically, what kind of authority do I give to you on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, right? And like, how do you prove this to me? The interesting part is like when I say authority, it's about you. And it's about like, if you are worth the authority. In reality, it's much more about trust. It's much more about me and my own limitation as a manager, and my own limitations. And like, I don't know if you really work that hard, kind of like just like subtle things where I'm feeling insecure. So it's much more about me being self-aware and like trying to formalize as much as a process as possible, like formalize for myself, like what do I expect that these people can do day 0? What do I expect to do? What should they do in case A, B, C, and D, right? What kind of trust would I give to them? Like, would it be okay? Like, if you like do whatever you want, if you manage to break this system, it's not your fault. It's like everybody's fault. But like, please do A, B, and C. If you did A, B, and C before, that's completely fine. Like, you can do whatever. Like, so it's a very abstract discussion right now, and I'm really making a really bad point in explaining it. But what I'm trying to say is, be very aware about how you systemize trust towards the team, because it also helps you with like implicit biases you might have. So like sooner or later, you might run into somebody who doesn't speak English that well, or who doesn't look like a typical, like all the other 10 engineer bros you have, right? And at that point, you might treat this person differently because without you being aware. So if you already have the systemization of trust in place, this is less likely to happen. So this is a nice benefit. But also it communicates to the team what they're able to do and where they should actually ping you. What's very common in teams is that there's like unclear between decisions and opinions, that people will like constantly try to ping you, right? Because they think it's better to get you on board. But that's just because it's not clear what decisions they are allowed to do, like where you actually, like how far you're giving them trust, right?
Okay, can you maybe tell us a little bit more on concrete examples from your work and from your experience? How does like systemizing this trust looks for you on your daily job and work with your teams?
I will pick like a super simple example out of engineering management, right? So at ProductHunt, for example, we had this rule that you should show the code you built to 2 people before you deploy, and you should get their okay. There were two aspects to this. Number one is by default, they should give their okay. So if they have concerns, they should like tell you, and you're expected to either follow up with a reason why this is a stupid idea, or with just code fixes it, right? And they basically trust you to do that. They don't ask you like, okay, when you have done this, please ping me again and show me that you have done this, because they already trust you on that scale, right? They trust you that you either fix it or explain why you didn't fix it. That's fine. The other one is we say you should have 2 + 1. But if you need to ship, you need to ship, you know, because for example, it's an emergency or it's a launch date and it's like last minute, right? So we trust you to do that. That's fine. But like, it's a common courtesy that you try to avoid these situations. And if you cannot avoid the situations, explain why you could not avoid the situation. And all of that doesn't feel like trust, but all of this is trust, you know? Another one is, and there's like a few things around here where you basically systemize processes, where you say, okay, I don't need you to show me everything you build. I need you to show something to somebody. And if this is like a bigger issue, that's like a higher level topic, I expect these people and you to reach out to me or whoever's most qualified, right? And that's like systemized of trust. Like in an ideal scenario, out of 10 decisions, 9 you do, 1 you run by somebody else, right? And out of these 10 decisions that you run by somebody else, 1 of them will actually meet me, right? And to make this happen, it should be very clear, like under what situations can they do what? And you can frame this as like authority. I frame this usually as trust, because it usually has more to do with the manager and less to do with the people, because the people usually like are very capable, very motivated, and just want to run, right? If this makes any sense.
It does, and I think it's like a few examples you gave made it very clear, at least for me. Now, I got one of the recent questions from the people that are watching us that I think it's very interesting one. So I'm just gonna read it for you. What can be the most important metrics of productivity in engineering team? How to identify efficiently a top performer?
Yeah, okay. So this is literally the hardest question in engineering management. How do you quantify quality output of knowledge workers, right? It's freaking hard. There is no quantified answer I can think on top of my head, and I literally looked into this. So what I usually use as a proxy is, there's a few things I try to use as a proxy, but there is no good answer to like this. There's nothing that's specific to engineering I know of. If you know, like if anybody in the chat knows of, like let me know. But what I usually try to do is a good proxy is the goal is not to code. The goal is to build a good product, right? So for example, one thing could be we agree on certain features to build in whatever decision framework we have in a company, and have these features actually be built. Have they been like, what results did we get out of that, you know, and like how did the people approach this? And this is a really like, how the hell do you quantify that, right? That's really, really hard. So what I tend to do is I tend to do peer reviews where people rate each other and like feedback each other. That's mostly to get like actually feedback, and not like talking behind somebody, but more like, hey, you did this awesome, and here you could improve, like actually helping each other. And part of that, what we do is also like basically saying, questions like, who do you think, I forgot the actual formulation, but this is like a very nuanced question, but the question is around the lines of like, who do you think performs better than you, and who do you think outlier performs, and this kind of stuff. This is something we just do to see if we have any blind spots as management. Like this thing where we, hey, wait, what? People say this person, like, oh, we should like look closer, right? We never like the customer care support person, right? It's like really outperforming. Like we didn't even realize, we just took this for granted. So like peer reviews is something that works really well, and everything else is kind of like proxies. So for example, you can set up a framework like, let's say OKRs, like you agree on goals and like key results. And then how close are you to those? Like, are you actually performing against them? Then you have the question, like, should they hit their goals, or should they, like, is it more the question is like, how do they perform compared to their past? And that's a metric you can use, which is very, it's enough quantified that you can put a number to it, but it's still questionable, right? So what I usually tend to do, the TLDR here, is I tend to focus on product and less on engineering. And I tend to focus more on feedback from the team among each other than just looking at the output itself. So on and so on. This is like roughly what I do. There's a few things that you can do to evaluate code bases, like the quality of code bases. The one I strongly recommend is complexity analysis. So basically looking how many if statements, for example, are in there. And if it's getting less, it means the code is less complex. If the code is less complex, it's easy to understand. If it's easy to understand, it's easier to change. And that's a number, but you can't really use this to judge teams. But it's something that's along the lines.
Yeah, but I really liked your approach that focuses, on a big picture and on the reason why you do coding in the first place. So I loved it. I find it inspiring, and I hope some of our viewers do as well. Now we have a few people who apparently follow you on Twitter as well, and we have a question that might sound mysterious at first to those who don't follow you. So something about opinions versus decisions. So can you explain what it means and what kind of strategy it is?
Yeah, so a friend of mine said once that I'm really good in making stupid stuff sound tweetable. So a common problem you have in every team is it's not clear who makes decisions and who adds opinions. And a very common pattern of this is like you have a team meeting, and for whatever reason, there is like one of the people who's like longer in the team, maybe one of the co-founders, right? Who's technically not part of that team. He's not a person they report to, but he's somehow still involved because, I don't know, like in engineering, he built early parts of the product. So he feels related to this kind of stuff, right? Or she feels related to this. So is their opinion of them, is this like a decision or is this like an opinion? So if they say something really strongly and they might be like really opinionated, like hard people, right? Is this something that you should take as a decision because they say we cannot do that because if we do this, the company will fail? Or is this more like an opinion, right? Another example might be the designer wants to change something in the iOS app, but the engineers say like, no, this is against the best practices of Apple apps. Like we can't do that, right? So how do you make the decision in here? Like who runs this decision? Who adds opinions? The default answer to this is like the people who actually build. Like at AngelList, we have the saying, she who codes decides. Like the person who builds it should run the last decision with the idea that this person will also have to fix it if it was the wrong decision, right? Sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't work. Sometimes you still need like, what would the designer like? Should the designer have this? There's one but like one way how I usually approach this is like reformulating it from a binary decision to like a risk discussion. So like, how much risk are we willing to take? Because that's a discussion that's usually easy to like, should we do this redesign? Yes or no, right? That's a hard decision. Easy decision is like, how much resources are we willing to commit? Because that's something you might have a different answer to do. I have a different answer to, but we at least can agree somewhere, right? Like somewhere in the middle, maybe. So reframing decisions as like sometimes as risk discussions is very healthy, because then you focus on the resources invested versus strong opinions, right? Another one is, as a manager, making a clear stand that a team has the authority versus other people. Everybody adds opinions, that's great, right? And they will add opinions until you, and that's great. But in the end, it's your decision, like the team's decision. So that's a responsibility the manager has to do. And a very common problem is that, for example, a CEO, I don't know, like CEO jumps into the Slack channel of a team and says something like, hey, you should really check out what this other team is doing, like this other company. They're doing A, B, C, D. It's kind of what we were trying to do, like, but they're doing it amazing, blah, blah, blah. Like, here's a link. He leaves or she leaves. And then afterwards, everybody's like, okay, we really don't like that. Should we now reconsider it? Like, we already agreed on it, that is a bad idea. Like, what the hell are we supposed to do now? And shit, you know, and it's kind of like, I call this like drive-by management. It's kind of like you jump in, you shoot, you leave, and everybody's like, there's damage everywhere, right?
Everyone's dead.
Everybody's dead. Wade of Zapier has a good method for this. He has it from Damesh of HubSpot. It's basically what he introduced is 4 keywords that he adds to messages, you know, just to make sure people know what kind of feedback that is. And he like, every team makes their own. The only thing is like he puts them in his wiki page, like a team wiki page, so that everybody knows what he means with this. And he has something like FYI, like hashtag FYI. That just means it's a link. Like, I didn't even properly look at it. It's just a link. Like, let me know what you think about it. Then it's maybe a hashtag suggestion. I think it's a good idea. At least if you have time, tell me why you don't agree, right? The next one is, I forgot this. There's like a third one, which basically says, I strongly think this is a good idea. Please absolutely take the time and tell me where I'm wrong, right? And the fourth one is basically, he calls it a plead, and he's like, guys, get your fucking act together. Like, we should absolutely do that. And if you don't want to do that, please let's sit down now together, because either I'm doing something fundamentally wrong or you doing something fundamentally wrong. But an interesting thing is that other people in the team also pick up these hashtags, and all of a sudden you have a code that works across cultures. You know, very common problem I have as a German person is a Californian person comes to me and be like, do whatever you think is right. And for the Californian person, this means do the one thing that everybody expects you to do. And for me as a German person, this means I do whatever the fuck I think is right. You know, like, you told me. So there's a cultural difference between a lot of remote teams, right? So if you have an explicit agreement, that makes it at least clear what kind of feedback something is. This helps, for example, people who are not part of a team, who maybe less interact, give opinions without making them sound like decisions, right? And this helps at least the team as a whole to be a little bit more aware about like who makes decision and who not. And as a manager, additionally, you have to have the authority and the awareness to decide, like to make a framework, like who decides in your company, how you make decisions. You need to educate your team how to make decisions versus like what your decision would be and all this kind of stuff. And literally everybody else adds opinions. And this is where the whole decisions versus opinions comes from.
Very interesting insights on, you know, basically creating a codes in your company and actually how to make decisions and how to separate them from opinions. Loved it. Now, obviously, we knew before that we will probably not make answers for all of the questions because there were many. So, and we have to finish soon. So I'll just ask you a final question that is out of script, and maybe we'll tackle some of the questions that other people had. You know, in the world when everyone, you know, praise successes and how great we are, and I think that's very good and great. Let's talk a little bit about the failures and mistakes. So if you could share some of the things you've done in the past that you would do now differently. So some of the failures and mistakes of yours, what would it be and what people can learn from them?
Jesus, I came in already. I did like I did more right in my life. Do you have like this area you want to focus on, or like?
Well, let's focus on engineering management, obviously. Okay. Remote teams.
I have a strong one. That's actually, yeah. So I am a really bad manager, and I used to be an absolutely horrible manager. especially when I was a founder of a company beforehand. I used to, in my opinion, basically burn out people. And it's kind of common that first-time founders burn out their first employees because they are stuck in management and they don't know what they want, and the product changes all the time, right? And I used to be one of those, definitely. I maybe still am, I don't know. Let me think, like a common thing I did is I had like the product wasn't going really well. It wasn't going great, but it wasn't going like really great. It was like, like okay-ish. And in the words of startups, that's an absolute no-go, obviously. For whatever stupid reason, it's an absolute no-go. So I was constantly trying to change the product, improve what we were doing, like change pivot maybe to that pivot, maybe to that pivot, maybe that. And what I did is I literally took all my uncertainty and basically went to the team and was like, here's all my uncertainty, here's all my doubt, like handle it, have fun, right? Which looking back was a bad mistake. Like it's completely okay to be transparent, it's completely okay to share doubts. All of this stuff is okay. But what happened in the end was almost that my team became almost like a psychotherapist, like discussing every little problem I have with this pivot idea, with that pivot idea, with that problem, right? And I think that because we constantly switch the product instead of like just focusing on something, we had like a lot of good ideas, and each of them could have been a great idea if we would have just like focused more on this instead of like jumping to the next one because we were uncertain. This makes sense. So looking back, I think this was one of the biggest failures I had as a manager, like to constantly jump between every idea I had. So like I went to a meeting, I came back, I was super inspired from this meeting, and like I told everybody and like how we could adapt this and blah blah blah. And at that point, I think maybe because of like the whole opinions versus decisions, like for me it was an opinion, and for a lot of people in the team it was kind of like a half-baked decision already. And they were like, okay, so maybe we should try something in this direction, and then they try to do something in this direction, which was bad, to put it mildly. Needless to say, this company completely, this company went against the wall.
Okay, I think that was a perfect advice, and you kind of wrap up a lot of things you said with this story of yours. So thank you for a humble answer. It's not an easy thing to admit that.
It was a very positive end for a call, right? Like we're ending on like a really positive note.
I think that the positive note of it is that, we all do mistakes, but the most important thing is to learn from them and, improve ourselves. And obviously, at least that's my impression. This is what you have done. And yes, so thank you very much for this. I encourage you to look on the other questions, and if you find them inspiring, keep feeding us with your great tweets and articles. And well, thank you again for agreeing to have this chat, and for all the people who are viewing us, go on to the next keynote, and we will soon unlock next blog about growing and scaling with remote work. Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Awesome.
Bye, Andreas.
Bye-bye.